I'm Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin thought leader, and I consider myself a monetary scientist, an entrepreneur, a journalist, and an investor. I got into Bitcoin a long time ago, pretty much when it first began. I was publicly recommending it in early 2011, in January of 2011, so well before that initial rise up to over $30 a coin. Yes, I was in the seed round investment for BitPay, which is the largest merchant processor. In that before Peter Thiel even, and also I led the seed round for the Armory wallet, which is building out the foundational infrastructure for large corporate adoption of Bitcoin, and also a seed round investor and Series A investor in the Kraken exchange. Yeah, so one of the things that really grabbed my attention with Bitcoin is that this is the largest innovation in terms of monetary science that the world's seen in a long time. For example, Nicholas Copernicus, he came up with the quantity theory of money 500 years ago. Isaac Newton developed the gold standard that we're still, you could say, coasting on with our world monetary system, because we've gone from commodity money to fiat currency, which they had to actively delink from gold. Franklin Roosevelt issued an executive order to confiscate all the gold, made it illegal for Americans to own. Nixon severed that link, and so we've been coasting on this gold standard that Isaac Newton developed hundreds of years ago, that Johann von Goethe wrote about in part 2 of Faust, all the negative effects that happen to society when this quantity theory of money is, you could say, violated. And Satoshi Nakamoto with Bitcoin, this is the largest innovation in monetary science since Isaac Newton's gold standard. And it's a whole new epoch of money, this math-based money or math-based currency. And it's a protocol, so it's a new layer in the internet also. So the money is just one application of this protocol. We're going to have many other applications in addition to the money or the currency. And so this is extremely exciting, and where this triple entry bookkeeping, this distributed decentralized ledger, where all of this is going to lead in terms of capital formation and accumulation and governance, very exciting, because we came up with double entry bookkeeping, over 500 years ago. We haven't really had advancements since then, and yet Bitcoin is an advancement all the way across the board in so many different areas, and it's extremely exciting. Thousands of years ago, we had single entry bookkeeping. I've got 5 oranges, and then you erase it and you got 4 oranges, and then you erase it and you got 7 oranges. Well, the Medici, they came up with double entry bookkeeping. That's where you have a debit and a credit. And so now we're tracking how we got that 6 orange balance or 12 oranges. But now with Bitcoin, we have the first practical implementation of triple entry bookkeeping. And we basically have the debit and the credit, and then we have the confirmation in the network that that transaction actually happened. And because it's in the blockchain, it becomes an immutable fact in terms of information theory. Like, there's no way to forge it or cause it to go away. It's provable from a mathematical sense, kind of like we had proofs in geometry. We can prove all of these balances in the Bitcoin blockchain. They're cryptographically provable. And so that's the triple entry bookkeeping nature that we see coming out of Bitcoin, and that's a tremendous innovation. BitPay is a merchant processor. Back when I was in the seed round investment for BitPay, it was very difficult to spend your Bitcoins and very difficult for merchants to know how to accept them. And so we make it extremely easy for merchants to accept Bitcoins. They can either receive the Bitcoins themselves, or they can put in a percentage, say they want 70% dollars or they want 30% euros, and it'll automatically exchange Bitcoin Bitcoins and direct deposit to their bank account. So we make it very seamless for merchants like Zynga, the big publicly traded game company, to accept customers from anywhere in the world as long as they have Bitcoins, and then get dollars or euros direct deposit to their bank account as soon as sales are made. And so we make it very easy for this merchant adoption to happen with Bitcoin, which is kind of the first app of Bitcoin, this currency app. Yeah, and with BitPay we have about 30,000 merchants right now, and that's including that's including where we might have a merchant processor like Shopify or something that has 70,000 merchants all on their own. We're only counting Shopify once. We're not counting all the 70,000 merchants with Shopify or Foxy, 3D Card, etc. So we have a lot of merchants have the ability to accept via BitPay if they want to. Yeah, so one of the big deals with Bitcoin, and if you read Satoshi's white paper, it's the ability to have a trustless system where you don't need to trust a third party or a central bank or a bank in any way. And really, when you're writing code for cryptography, we have a central theorem. Anything that can be done with a central authority can be done without one. However, in the Bitcoin ecosystem, we need to have ways to organize people and incentivize people with their jobs and to get integration done and stuff like that. And so we see centralized entities like BitPay or the exchanges, etc., come around, and yeah, they're centralized, but I don't think they really pose any threat to the underlying protocol and the trustless nature of that. However, you do need to trust those counterparties, particularly if they're holding the private keys. And some of those entities, like Mt. Gox, who lost $500 million worth of private keys for individuals, prove that they just weren't trustworthy. So we're going to see a lot of creative destruction in that sense, and there will probably be regulation and consumer protection that comes down the pipeline to help build out this entire industry. And I think from an auditor or information system auditor point of view, we're going to see the creation of a whole new industry for this new form of crypto property, for helping secure the private keys, audit the private keys, help do it all in a private manner, help secure the keys in a private manner, all of that. And so we have a lot to build out with this entire new industry and protocol. Just like in the early days of the internet, we had huge things that needed to be built out with the internet in order to make it functional and useful for people to go watch videos on YouTube or order movie tickets on Fandango or have apps on their iPhones or the Android phones, etc. Yeah, so I was actually around when the internet first came about. I mean, I was a little kid, but still, I'm tinkering around on it. I'm playing around with modems that have like 1200 baud, and it's interesting. In the first web browsers, there's an error for payment method not specified, kind of like we have a 404 error for page not found. And even way back then, the people designing and building the internet and the web browsers, etc., they had foresaw this time when we would have a way to transfer value merely as data or information. The Byzantine generals problem had not been solved then, which is the big deal with Bitcoin. It solves that problem. You have distributed consensus, distributed trust, but it hadn't been solved back then, and so they built in this error, payment method not specified, but knowing that in the future we'd have a way to build that out. And so now Bitcoin has come about, solved that technological problem, and so we're going to see a whole bunch of things developed out of that, just like we saw TCP/IP, and then people built layers on top of that, and then entire stacks on top of that, and now we have all types of services that are possible. Bitcoin's going to enable the same type of innovation to happen, and the internet, in my opinion, is going to reconstitute itself because of these new innovations. Yeah, so when I first got involved in Bitcoin, there were a lot of things that laid undeveloped. There were a lot of things that needed to be designed into Bitcoin at the very beginning to enable stuff in the future like smart contracts, and there were a lot of things that you could do with Bitcoin, but none of it had been done. And Alan Reiner, he developed this Armory software, and that helps. What he did is he innovated being able to store your private keys offline. And he innovated hierarchical deterministic wallets so that you only needed to do a backup once instead of backing up every 100 addresses like the reference client at the time. And so he made some tremendous innovations to help people secure their Bitcoins. The other thing is Armory never touches your private keys. So you generate all the private keys yourself. Armory never touches them. Armory never holds them or stores them. I mean, you're running this open source software on hardware that you own and control, and that's a big deal because there's no way that Armory can steal your keys, period. And so it's really become the standard for securing Bitcoins in the whole space. And now we've also, Alan's innovated multi-signature with Armory. And so previous to when we're doing this interview, April of 2014, there's been no real safe way for a large hedge fund to have $100 million in Bitcoin. There's been no way to properly segregate the duties and the private keys because they all have to be recombined at one point in time and space, and the employee could steal them, steal $100 million because it's just data. But now we've fixed that problem with Armory, and so it's innovated it's innovated cold storage, it's innovated hierarchical deterministic wallets, and now we've innovated the multi-signature cold storage along with those two things. And it's a very bright future because it's going to enable larger and larger players to safely and securely move capital into Bitcoin. So with Bitcoin, we use a private key to sign a transaction in order to move the Bitcoins around. One of the great things about the protocol is that you can actually have multiple signatures that are required in order to move those Bitcoins around. You can require 2 of 3, 7 of 12, 15 of 20, etc. And we've built that into Armory for the first time from a cold storage perspective. And that's going to allow a lot larger amounts of capital to move into Bitcoin because duties will be properly segregated and the risk of theft will be much lower. So a few months ago, I was having dinner with Dr. Adam Back. He's kind of like the Gandalf of Bitcoin. And Dr. Back was explaining this concept of Sidecoins to me, where we could have a firewall with Bitcoin, a firewall. We could send Bitcoins over here and do the innovation out here that's currently being done in the altcoins. And then we could upgrade if we find that there are no problems with the innovation that's happening there, but at the same time not threaten the core of Bitcoin. And now Dr. Back has found a way that not only can you send the Bitcoins into the side chain, but you can actually bring them back out. And so I think this is going to be able to help Bitcoin grow and innovate because there's going to be this interoperability between the side chains and the main coin. And when we develop something good on the side chain, we're going to be able to incorporate that back into the core. And so Bitcoin's just going to keep growing and mutating and expanding and keeping that innovation happening around the core protocol. We have a long history of brilliant minds encountering opposition from people who just have no mathematical abilities, no scientific abilities, etc. For example, Nicholas Copernicus, the heliocentric theory. You would say that we're a pro-heliocentric theory society. We don't believe that the sun is revolving around the Earth. Well, he came up with the quantity theory of money in 1516. He wrote a book on interest rates in 1526. Who developed the gold standard that all of the nations of the world used to expand global trade and raise standard of living in the whole Industrial Revolution? That came out of Isaac Newton. You would say that we're a pro-Isaac Newton society. And now, as we have the greatest innovation in monetary science since Isaac Newton's gold standard, you would hope that people would be a pro-Satoshi Nakamoto society, that we would want to welcome with open arms these fantastic monetary and scientific achievements. And so people who want to ban it, we had people that wanted to burn Galileo and Nicholas Copernicus at the stake. I mean, where would society be if we didn't harness and benefit from these geniuses? I mean, anybody it's really easy to destroy, but what's really difficult is to innovate and to discover. Heliocentric theory, calculus, Newtonian physics, gold standard, Bitcoin, it's all part of our advancement from the swamps to the stars. The identity of Satoshi is a very interesting one. Never have we really seen this where society benefits in such a tremendous way, and yet the innovator of that, the discoverer of that, is able to retain their privacy. We don't know if it's an individual, we don't know if it's a group of people, we don't even know if it might be an alien for all we know. I mean, we don't know. But at the end of the day, it's just mathematical code and software code, and that stands on its own. The theory, graph theory, vector calculus, algebraic equations like the Pythagorean theorem, they stand on their own regardless of whoever the personality is that discovered them, or Archimedes' principle. So, it would be kind of, part of me is interested to know who Satoshi is. I heard a joke what is a Dorian? It's an unconfirmed Satoshi. And maybe that's part of the mystique of the story. These cypherpunks going back decades, it would fit very much into the culture out of which Bitcoin came, but I don't know that it's necessarily it's completely irrelevant to the functioning of Bitcoin because we have the code to read, but it would be kind of fun to know. I think it will be interesting to see exactly how much economic volume and mass and gravity Bitcoin attains, particularly in the next 5 to 10 years. Already it's just pulling in so much human capital into its vortex, and all of that's leading to innovation and discovery and things of that nature. If we saw just 1% of the assets in offshore tax haven bank accounts come into Bitcoin, we're looking at millions of dollars per Bitcoin at current value. We don't know what's going to happen with the Yellen coin or the Draghi coin. They're just printing them with reckless abandon with quantitative easing and zero interest rate policy and all the counterparty risk with the banks, etc. So we don't necessarily know what's going to happen with that, but I think that a significant portion of gold's market cap, which is attributed to no counterparty risk, equity-based, Bitcoin shares that. And so as Bitcoin continues to stay around, as more confidence is gained in it by market participants, I think we're going to see more and more capital being allocated into Bitcoin because people will find that it's a great place to store their value and store their capital. And even if just 1% of the market cap of gold, which is about $7 trillion, if 1% of that were to move into Bitcoin, you're still looking at a market cap 10 times larger than what it is today. But how many Bitcoins are unsaleable because people lost the private keys? How many are people just going to sit on pretty much indefinitely, because what would they rather buy? And so the actual amount of Bitcoins that are saleable, that are in the funds flow or in the float, that's really small. And so if you had $70 billion, which is nothing compared to the global worldwide liquidity pyramid, try to move into Bitcoin, it could really move the price up fast. And so I think we're going to see just lots of capital flowing into Bitcoin as people continue to feel safer with it, and that's where that's where the economic opportunity is. Yeah, so it's very difficult to kind of see all the activity that's going on with Bitcoin. We recently just introduced the payments channel, so a lot of transactions are happening off blockchain, so people don't even see those transactions. With these new side chains and other innovations like homomorphic values and encryptions and zero knowledge proofs, we're going to make even more of the Bitcoin blockchain become completely private in a lot of ways, which will make it even more asymmetric knowledge, even more difficult to analyze exactly what the user adoption rates, etc. are. So I think it's going to be I think like the internet and like email and like other protocols, Bitcoin's going to continue getting adopted. It's got the network effects, it's got the brain share, the mind share, and I don't really see anything being able to displace it from a protocol point of view, and so that's all going to drive capital into it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was trying to put some type of a petroleum product into my truck to actually clean out the engine. I mean, I don't know how my car works. I know how to put gas in it, but even oil changes, I go to a mechanic to get my oil changes done. Cars are very complex. Airplanes are super complex, and yet how many hundreds of millions of people fly all around the world on airplanes? They don't need to know what a localizer is, or like how to shoot an approach, or be instrument rated to fly in the clouds, or have their certifications to work on repairing the airplanes. And I think it's the same way with Bitcoin. We don't need to know how SMTP works to send emails. Gmail can make that very easy for us. And so I think that even though Bitcoin is very complex and will get more complex as it keeps getting built out, I think we're going to see additional layers or apps built on top of it that make it easier and easier for customers to use. And even with the money that we use today in the currency like dollars or pesos or euros, a lot of people don't even realize or understand how those work, or how they're created, or how interest rates are determined or attempted to be set by policymakers. So, a lot of this stuff is just very complex, and at the end of the day, somebody wants to know that they can trade this for a taco or a hamburger or their rent, or that they can save in it, that it'll have some purchasing power next year, in 10 years, that they can make contracts based on those units of account, etc. I think that Bitcoin's got a lot of potential, and we're going to be building all of it out. It's a huge technological advance, a huge monetary science advance. It's also economically censorship resistant. So that's going to help people perform the pricing and economic calculation without the interference from centralized authorities or third parties. This will be incredibly helpful for unleashing all types of economic innovation and economic calculation. The economy will get a lot more efficient, which is, that's all going to be extremely positive for society. In terms of myself, I've written the freebitcoinguide.com that people can learn and get started with Bitcoin, and I have a couple of blogs at runtogold.com and also howtovanish.com, where we help people take control of their privacy, protect themselves from identity theft and other problems in this digital age. Yeah, so our privacy is extremely important. We have threats to our privacy not only from corporations but also from governments. For example, Google has a patent on price discrimination. They can look at your browsing history, your emails, and they can decide to charge you more merely because they have that knowledge. How this will be applied to insurance companies and health insurance, how governments could use it. We know from history that totalitarian regimes like to use this asymmetric knowledge to enforce their regimes. We have Hitler's Night of the Long Knives, where he targeted all of his political opponents in one night. And that's why he didn't really have much opposition. So it's very dangerous centralizing knowledge, information about everybody in society. And I think that the internet and particularly now with Bitcoin, anything that can be decentralized will be decentralized, whether it's bandwidth, storage, money, press, communication, all of it. So that's a very positive trend, I think, for society, because otherwise we could find ourselves in a situation that is extremely, extremely dangerous. So one of the great things about Bitcoin is that it's censorship resistant. And we like to talk about that from a BitTorrent point of view, that you can't just shut the network down. But I think that it's important to look at it that it's economically censorship resistant. We had Alan Greenspan testify twice before Congress back in the 90s that central banks, plural, stand ready to lease gold in increasing quantities should the price rise. Now, if you own a lot of something, why run a cartel to keep the price down? Because we're seeing the price being suppressed, not supported, and not by users, but by owners, and not for obvious reasons. The reason that the central banks want to suppress the price of gold is to maintain control over their fiat paper franchises. Their ability to issue what we use as currency is infinitely more valuable than the price of a portfolio asset. Because with that, they're able to manipulate interest rates through price controls, and interest rates regulate production over time for the entire economy. So they're able to engage in forms of economic censorship across the entire economy because of the control they have over the monetary systems. But now we're seeing that the central banks are losing control. For example, the Bundesbank requested 800 tons of gold from the Fed, and the Fed said, we're not going to give it to you. We'll give you 50 tons a year for the next 8 years. And so I think that Bitcoin, because it's censorship resistant, it's going to have this incredible effect on the economic censorship that central authorities have attempted to do through their control and manipulation of the fiat paper franchises. And that's going to be a very interesting thing, because Ludwig von Mises, the great Austrian economist, he said that you can't understand the importance of sound money without understanding that it's a bulwark against despotic inroads on the part of governments. It belongs in the same class as constitutions and bills of right. And so gold, silver, and now Bitcoin, just like freedom of speech, because Bitcoin really is just speech, they're not just essential commodities, but they're essential checks and balances in the political machinery. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how Bitcoin affects and grows all throughout the world, particularly on how it impacts China. We already see in Africa that technology is far outpacing their governmental structures. Cell phone towers just pop up, and so Bitcoin is going to get rapidly adopted in that continent, which is a huge continent. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how Bitcoin just grows and metastasizes and outruns and outcompetes a lot of these regulatory, centralized, trusted parties, because it's trustless, and it allows so many other things to be built in a trustless way.
In the fall of 2008, the world financial system nearly fell apart because of the incompetence and instability of the banking system.
With Bitcoin, anyone can send and receive any amount of money anywhere in the world, basically for free. And there's nothing that the big banks or politicians can do to stop it.